Think about what makes this country special. What makes this country the greatest nation in history? It's a simple concept. Parents make sacrifices for their children so that when they grow up, they can have life better than they did. And each generation in America has done that for the succeeding one. When you start to turn it around and live for the moment and spend for the moment and live for the now and spend for the now, that is a terrible sign.
A terrible sign indeed. And that warning was from 2009. And yet the government debt has absolutely exploded and has enslaved Americans into debt poverty. And that's really no way to live life, you guys. And think about it. In certain metro areas, making $250,000 is just minimum wage. And so today we'll ask the question and answer the question, just how much debt is the US government in? Just how bad is the government spending? How much are we paying back in interest? And then we'll ask the question, how is this impacting our households as Americans? And I have our community expert, Mitch Vexler, here to help break it down. Mitch, sir, I heard you had a special meeting today.
How'd that go? It was pretty good. It was an hour and a half long with a state rep who was horrified as to what she learned. But in an hour and a half, basically, we took 20 pounds of potatoes and stuck it in a half-pound bag. So it flew, and it's kind of like drinking water from a fire hose. But it was a good meeting. She understands the depth of the problem, and it is worse than, because you can't get all the way through all this in an hour and a half, obviously. And it's taking us through these videos several hours to lay it all out, but it was good.
Good. Got to hear it, man. Well, I'm going to jump right into this video, and I want to start, Mitch, and I'm hoping to give you some curveballs. You're probably still going to hit home runs, but take a look at this. We're in 35.1 trillion with a T in debt. And that's actually probably, not even accurate, probably much more than that. But that's, again, just with the reporting, 35.1 trillion. The government deficit over the last 100 years. It's interesting to note it changed drastically. Mid 40s, you guys see it just jumped up, went down, and really plateaued for, man, what looks like 40 years. And all of a sudden, just unhinged, absolutely unhinged. As we make our way into the GFC, unhinged, the lockdowns unhinged. Again, you guys, what I wanted to show you here is the trajectory of debt. As far as how much we've spent this year, the government has spent, and this is not how much they've received, but they've spent $5.6 trillion just for the fiscal year ending in October. The deficit, so they're adding this deficit to the debt, so far, $1.51 trillion in debt. Mitch, and take your time explaining this if you want. Is America enslaved in debt?
Yes, and it's worse than what you just showed, because what you showed was what they call the national debt, but that is not the federal fiscal burden. The federal fiscal burden, as far as we know, is right now today is about 142 trillion. The US government is claiming the total assets of the United States is 152 trillion. We showed that on a video a couple back. Well, that means that the assets to liabilities are almost neck and neck at this point, and that 93% of America's wealth is in fact now debt burdened. And it just keeps going downhill and downhill from there. So the straight answer to your question is yes, except that it's worse.
Obviously, we're going over one set of data that says 35 trillion, but can you explain, Mitch?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you're adding to get, the higher number, the 142 trillion? Is that a lot of, the unfunded liabilities, Social Security, pensions, things, fill the gap. Explain to the viewers what's missing from that 35.
Everything. Because the reality of it is that those unfunded liabilities are triple up from what you're seeing. And therein lies the problem. I mean, they want to create a narrative that things are rosy, but when you use the math and you understand, like that, you showed the one chart of the debt rocketing up, some from the 1940s. Well, that's just straight up math, right? I told you that the rule of 72 means that give or take, assuming a 10% interest rate, that you're going to double your debt every 5 years. And in fact, that's really what's happening, or every 7 years, depending on the monkeying around by the interest rate. So the idea that that chart, well, it's horrible from the 1940s and it just rockets up. Well, yeah, but that's the rule of 72, just how the math plays out. And we've got spreadsheets. You can just plug in the interest rate and it'll take it across and say, okay, fine. So if the interest rate runs to 10% or 12%, then the timeline of that debt increasing every 7 years happens faster. So it'll drop down to 5 years, 4.5 years, the higher the interest rate. And what you're seeing is the cumulative compounding effect of non-payment and reduction of principal. So what you've seen in the bonds recently at the school districts is we did the research on it. In the last 3 years, we couldn't find a school district that retired its bonds. Well, bonds come due every 3 and 5 years. So what are they doing? Well, the best way I can describe it is the rolling out and the rolling up. They roll up the principal, they roll out the timeline, and then they roll up the interest payments because it's cumulative. They didn't pay it off. The interest payments keep going. Now, here's where it gets really wonky. So if the school district 4 years ago had 2% money, the cost of that money today is 8.5%. You're 400% up in your interest costs. If you roll up and you roll out and you didn't reduce your debt, what did you do? Cumulative compounding. There's no way around it. And that's why the rule of 7 is etched in stone.
Speaking of, well, just to reiterate, so we're, somewhere in the debt range of 35 trillion to maybe 150.
It's not even true. It's 142 and it's the government's own.
Right. So, right. 35, 142, who's looking under the hood, Mitch? What's a few trillion here or there? I mean, geez Louise. But it is scary. And speaking of interest payments, let's move on to the spending habits now. And let's talk if they are paying down debt, are they paying down principal, or are they barely, well, I'll show you guys. But before I do that, Mitch, I want to get, I want to set up the viewers. I want us to listen to Ben Bernanke in 2011 sounding the alarm on what's going on right now. And I want to get your reaction.
As the economy continues to expand and stimulus policies are phased out, the budget deficit should narrow over the next few years. Unfortunately, even after economic conditions have returned to normal, the nation faces a sizable structural budget gap. Both the Congressional Budget Office and the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget project that the budget deficit will be almost 5% of GDP in fiscal year 2015, assuming that current budget policies are extended and the economy is at that point close to full employment. Of even greater concern, though, is the longer run projections that extrapolate current policies and make plausible assumptions about the future evolution of the economy, which show the structural budget gap increasing significantly further over time. For example, under the alternative fiscal scenario developed by the CBO, which assumes most current policies are extended, the deficit is projected to be about 6.5% in 2020 and almost 13% of GDP in 2030. The ratio of outstanding federal debt to GDP, expected to be about 69% at the end of this fiscal year, would under that scenario rise to 87% in 2020 and 146% in 2030. One reason the debt is projected to increase so quickly is that the larger the debt outstanding, the greater the budgetary cost of making the required interest payments. This dynamic is clearly unsustainable.
He was warning the viewers of that video that the potential for, as you see here, percentage of debt to GDP, he was warning in 2020 it could be 6.5. 2020 was actually 14.69%. He was a little off there. I want to go into the charts, show the deficit spending, the mortgage-backed securities, how much money is going towards interest payments. But do you have an initial reaction on that video, Mitch?
That statement, the entire presentation that he made, is the ultimate definition of speaking out of both sides of your mouth. On one hand, he says, well, but the deficit should be coming down. And 2 seconds later, he's explaining how the deficits are going to balloon out of sight. Well, the reality of it is, as I said, The rule of 72, an idiot should have known that way back in 1950, right? These people are paid to know this. He clearly doesn't understand, and or he does understand and is just trying to keep the fraud going. But that's why we're at the tipping point now, right? When you've got 142 trillion, including unfunded liabilities, and they're known numbers, well, how can you possibly say that, oh, well, we didn't know back then, right? Because the rule of 72 allows you to project forward. That's exactly what it does. And if you don't pay off the debts, then the debts, because it's compounding, cumulative, get bigger and bigger to the point where they can't be paid. The other thing is, right now today, just on that 35 trillion number alone, that's the national debt. Never mind the parts of the unfunded liabilities. That's just the national debt. Per taxpayer, give or take, that's the equivalent of $268,000 just on that 35 trillion. Okay, now triple it up. You're damn near $800,000 per taxpayer. It can't be paid off at $268,000, let alone the $800,000 per taxpayer. The math doesn't support it. Ergo, straight up bankruptcy. And when those two numbers cross each other, 142 trillion versus the total assets of the United States at 152, it is the irrefutable definition of bankruptcy, and there will be defaults. And we're, based on these numbers, less than 12 months away.
I got another video that I think you're going to appreciate. But one of the things he said is, not that it matters necessarily, Mitch, and I'm going to show the viewers here in a minute, but debt to GDP as a percentage. He was warning warning whoever was listening to that video that it could potentially hit 140%, okay, in 2030. Unimaginable, right? But I wanted to show the viewers where we're at right now.
Right now, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Not quite 140%. Not quite 140%, Mitch. 123%.
In
Absolutely.
2023. Wait a minute. In 2023.
Yes. Yeah. This is only going to 2023. This is only going to 2023, so it could very well be worse. But look at this goes back to 1948, Mitch. We've never had this amount of fraud that has just systemically embedded itself into our bedrooms, in our houses. This is crazy. This is U.S. government spending for 2024. And I just wanted to note that the interest on the debt, like you're saying, like everyone's warning about, the interest on the debt is the second highest debt category that the U.S. government is paying. So the second highest, 14%, goes towards paying the debt. The only thing higher than that is Social Security. But this exceeds national defense, Medicare, health, income security, VA benefits, education, training, transportation. I mean, the amount of money that they're spending right now just to pay for the debt, the past spending since 1940, 1980s, it got out of hand. All of that, 14%. That's crazy. Another thing that drives me crazy, Mitch, is this type of spending right here. This is mortgage-backed securities. The Fed got even more clever. How can we put our hand in the cookie jar here? Now, some would say, now I've highlighted 3 times where they've really kicked in quantitative easing or mortgage-backed security purchasing. This is the Fed, okay? So the start of, not the start, but towards the start of the great financial crisis, you see that first highlighted in yellow, okay? They saved a lot of pain, a lot of people, a lot of institutions. But again, though, they did it right here around the end of 2012, which is absolutely crazy. And then you can see here in 2020, they did it again. And some would say, Mitch, a little bit of quantitative easing, a little bit is necessary to prevent, horrible catastrophe, right? So if they didn't do the mortgage-backed securities that first round, during the GFC, it could have turned into a depression. And arguably at that time, we didn't want that, right? So some would say that it was appropriate. So Mitch, let me ask you this. Has the government enslaved us in unnecessary debt?
In reality, the government, i.e. Bernanke, is being paid to transfer our wealth, everybody's wealth, into the government's pockets and into the bank's pockets. Who's really responsible? At the tail end of the day, votes matter. The public has allowed this to happen to themselves by thinking and listening to the line being put forth by these government officials that we're here to help you. The second somebody says we're the government, we're here to help you, they are lying. and they will be transferring your assets into their pockets. And that is exactly what has happened. The idea, you talk about these mortgage-backed securities is just another way, but if you want to dance down that road so the public understands, our viewers understand what's going on. So if you have, let's say it's a $300,000 house, just for sake of conversation, do you know that the bank can literally cut that mortgage in additional derivatives 100 times? So then they have another 100 houses on top of it. So they mix and match percentages of your mortgage and put it into other tranches and then sell those tranches out. So when I was referring to a line of cocaine, that's a line of cocaine. And that's what they're doing. So the problem is that the people who buy these tranches can't even gain access to the actual collateral. There's nothing backing it up other than the implicit guarantee of that particular bank. And that comes right back to the third-party credit risk that I'm desperately going to avoid. I don't want anything to do with this. So the bottom line is that the shadow banking, Bernanke's numbers don't include anything having to do with the shadow banking. We don't want to talk about that. Why? Because if we have to raise that issue, that exposes the 35 trillion as being nothing more than a party line. It's complete BS. The real number, you have to include the unfunded liabilities because those liabilities come online every single year. They come online every single day. This clock, this cumulative compounding does not stop. And that's what your amortization schedule on your own mortgage shows you. You are responsible for paying the house payments on your mortgage. The government should be responsible, but it's not because it won't even discuss. On one hand, it says, yeah, it's 142 trillion. On the other hand, they pump all over the place, including in the mainstream media. Oh, it's only 35 trillion. We'll just keep pumping money. We'll just keep printing. It's complete nonsense.
I mean, it is complete nonsense because clearly the U.S. is broke, and all of these, enhancements of money or taking money and making more money and invisible debt. The fact that they're doing that, Mitch, and they're still out of money, it's shocking to me because, again, this is how I'm looking at this. I mean, the U.S. is broke, and they have to continue to print money to afford to not go bankrupt, and that prevention of U.S. bankruptcy has etched itself into now America, and now we're broke as a result of the U.S. being broke. And so here's the thing, Mitch. We have this tower of debt that's just sitting there, okay? And then we have this massive amount of horrible spending that I want, deficit spending I want no part of. And then listen to this video, Mitch.
Janet Yellen, Madam Secretary, thanks for joining us this morning. Let's start out with the timeline now of this possible default. You said earlier this week that you expect that it could come as early as June 1st. I know you get new information every day. Is that still your best estimate?
Yes, early June is when we project that we will run out of cash, and there is a chance it could be as early as June 1st. Of course, there is a lot of uncertainty, and I plan to update Congress as new information becomes available, but that's still our current thinking.
Are there extraordinary measures you can take around that time, or is that it?
Well, really, that's it. We've been using extraordinary measures for several months now, and our ability to do that is running out, and we will start to run down our cash. And our current projection is that in early June, a day will come when we're unable to pay our bills unless Congress raises the debt ceiling. And it's something I strongly urge Congress to do.
I want to go into some data here in a minute, Mitch, on the impacts this is all causing to the consumer. But before I do that, any comments there?
Yeah, there's a bastion of intelligence between those two. So the reality of it is that she's speaking a party line because she wants the debt ceiling increased. It's the exact opposite of what should be happening. First thing. Second thing, and to buttress even her point, do you know that last week there was a meeting following a prior meeting the week before at the Tarrant Appraisal District, which is Fort Worth? There were 15 school districts lined up like jets on a runway with their hand out saying, you must keep the real estate values rising because if you don't, we are bankrupt. That was that memo that we showed that Emily Wolf put together. And it's stunning because A, it's an admission that the school districts are bankrupt. B, the Tarrant Appraisal District had their heart in the right place with the idea of, okay, we'll freeze it. It didn't address all the frauds that have been committed, but the idea was we'll freeze it. The following week, the school districts show up with their hand out. Well, those school districts are acting just like Janet Yellen. You must keep this fraud going. We cannot address the underlying problems. These two things are 100% directly correlated.
And I want to show the viewers now, Mitch, the impact that's having on Main Street. Now, I mean, I already feel a recession in my household. A lot of other people feel a recession. If people have any credit card debt, I mean, for the most part, trust me, it's a recession in your household because your spending habits. But look at this. The CFPB came out with this report. Look at this share. This is the share of balances that are 90 days delinquent as a percentage. And I want to point out that it's over 10%, which is absolutely shocking to me because this is serious delinquency. At this point, if you have, you know, a 90-day late on your credit, you just got hit with 3 late payments. You went 30, 60, 90. Your purchasing power is gone for years. More than likely in most situations, but I wanted to point out the trajectory is worse than it was right before the GFC. So from a credit card standpoint right now, even though we don't see necessarily delinquencies with homes, we certainly see it when it comes to one of the most powerful consumer purchasing power, which is credit cards. Those delinquencies are absolutely exploding. And when we look at the consumer's ability to even pay for all of this, which is what I've been hammering, everyone's hammering, you know, please, my God, like, let's just talk about how can you afford this? Is the government just going to pay us? Is that where the missing income is going to come from? This just came out August 14th, Bureau of Labor Statistics. I mean, this is real earnings and I'll read this, real average hourly earnings increased 0.7% seasonally adjusted from July 2023 to July 2024, which essentially means that income growth, real income growth, is going up less than 1%. Meaning it's not mathematically possible for consumers to sustain this situation. And we see that with headlines like this. Banks are bracing. Now, this is an interesting website, Quartz. They've actually had some pretty interesting articles about the GFC, but the title of this is Banks Are Bracing for Consumers to Stop Paying Off Their Credit Cards. And this is, you know, JP Morgan, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. Obviously, they know something's coming. And I wanted to read just one paragraph here. JP Morgan built up a $3 billion provision for credit losses in the second quarter. Bank of America did $1.5 billion. What do they know, Mitch, that we don't know? Citi's allowance for credit losses totaled what? $21.8 billion at the quarter's end? That's absolutely shocking. And I'll read this last one. The build-up stores show banks bracing for a riskier environment where both secured and unsecured can create, which is debt, could create bigger losses for some of the nation's largest banks. We're not even talking about shadow banking. We're talking about the household pillars that are apparently keeping, you know, America together. I mean, isn't that why we're paying for them and bailing them out? Isn't that the premise here? So bail us out. A recent analysis of household debt by the New York Fed found that Americans owe a collective about $17 trillion on consumer loans, student debt, and mortgages. And this is last thing right here, Mitch. This is crazy to me. Now, this came out today, this morning at 9:39 a.m. You see that August 19th. This is from Market Watch. Just look at this headline. Wall Street is to your point, Mitch, Wall Street is 6 times the value of Main Street. That shouldn't be possible. It should be 1 for 1. It should be 1 for 1. It should not be 6 to 1. And this is according to a Bank of America analyst. Mitch, let me ask you, is America out of money when it can just print the money? I mean, do we even have to worry about, does America government have to worry about being bankrupt when they could just print money?
Well, before you even get into that, what you just showed is the exact reason why real estate taxes on assets need to be eliminated, right? You've got to flip the switch because people are entitled to have an asset. If you buy it and you pay for it, it's yours. So taxes can be paid in the form of sales taxes. That's perfectly fine because it's quantifiable. But what you just showed in that one clip is exactly why the real estate tax is under everybody in the United States. You've got an asset, you own it, it's yours, and nobody can take it as long as you're making the payments on the mortgage. So the other issue is, are we at the end game, the tipping point? Yeah, because the reality is the income isn't there under the enslavement that they've created by literally taking the land under your feet. It can't be paid for, and it's their debts. See, that stuff on Wall Street are derivatives. And like I said, when you can take a mortgage-backed security and cut it 1,000 different ways and retranche it, it's all complete nonsense. It's all based on theory. It's mathematical theory, but it isn't true because you can't get access to the actual underlying asset. So think of it this way. They took the tranches of these values of a house, $300,000 home. They cut it 100 different ways. They repackaged it. They sold it off. They picked up the fees in the middle. Now, if any one of those people on one of those particular tranches thinks that they can go back and get a piece of your house, a $300,000 home, they're delusional. It's a derivative. What you're seeing when they say, well, Wall Street's value is X, yeah, it really isn't, because at the tail end of the day, they can't collect. It's all hot air. It's all credit. It doesn't mean anything. The only thing that means something are hard assets. Now you've got something that's quantifiable. And even there, in the case of the office buildings, you better be real careful, because as we know, there are office buildings out there that are literally worth negative value.
I mean, they're doing all of this, Mitch. I mean, and they're still broke. I just can't. It's really difficult to wrap my mind around how they could be make money out of thin air like this, right? And still be broke. And really what it sounds like to me is they're printing and structuring these things to essentially print their problems away, while at the same time stealing my future and my children's future. Am I wrong to think that?
No, that's
Is that exactly what's going on here?
100%.
And then so, I mean, it's frustrating, Mitch, because again, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around a video we've done, 4 videos back. I mean, I'm learning a lot here, but let's conclude. Let's wrap this up. I want you to take, a minute or 2 minutes and talk to the viewers about what a solution to this debt crisis and government overspending really is. What's the solution here, Mitch? What could the normal American do after this video?
The normal American should be watching this series of videos to understand that people who are watching this series of videos know more, considerably more, than the government officials who profess and make these statements in public. Well, this is what we're doing to pay down the debt. Yeah, you haven't done anything in 50 years and it's only gotten worse. And it was a known thing that would happen just by virtue of the math under the rule of 72. So votes and voting considerably at this point in our history matters. You cannot keep voting for morons. If you put these morons in place, you get what you deserve. And that's a harsh statement, but that is the reality of where we are. This math and everything we've put forward and everything that's on our website is simply irrefutable. It cannot be argued against. Why? Because it's the government's own numbers. All we've done is expose the fraud on their numbers. They said this, just like you did a few minutes ago with Yellen. This is what they say, but it's a party line. These people are getting paid to keep the fraud going forward. In the case of the Fed, they're getting paid to protect the fraud committed at the banks because they created all these derivatives. None of the derivatives since 2008, 2009 have gone away. They're still out there. Now, add on to that the compounding cumulative effect of rolling up and rolling out. The combination is lethal, and that puts you to the point within the next 12 months where America's wealth will be less than America's debt in total. It'll be north of 152 trillion. There's no math on this planet that will allow that to be paid back. And in fact, we've exported these problems to other countries because the IMF, International Monetary Fund, picks up the phone and they speak to Yellen. They picked up the phone and they spoke to Bernanke. It's a cacophony of fools that literally cannot add one and one.
Okay, so part of the solution, I hope the viewers got all that mixed in there. That was pretty heavy, Mitch, which is awareness, right? So like step one is awareness. Once you're aware, you can empower yourself. It may feel overwhelming, all this information, but it's so very important. You don't give up. Part of the things that you could do to empower yourself and have confidence in yourself as an individual is just rebudget. Hang tight, make slow progress. You don't have to conquer the world tomorrow, but the sooner that you start making changes today, the sooner that your tomorrow will be better. And that's really what I want to give back to you guys. I really hope you guys are understanding that. We're trying to build a community as best as we can, full of value, full of information that you can lean on to help navigate you through this crisis. Hope you guys are seeing that. Everything's going to be linked below. Don't forget to sign the petition. Go to Mockingbird website, Mockingbird Properties. Everything's going to be linked here. And find out. And you guys, I'm going to tell you this. Once it's time next year in 2025 to start fighting the CADs, Mitch and I are going to be here. And other than that, guys, if you're out there investing in real estate, you know that we wish you luck and we hope you win.